Welcome to the Fram Museum. My name is Geir Kløver and I am the director of the museum. On this tour, I'm going to show you every nook and cranny of the polar ship Fram, the famous vessel that was used by Fridtjof Nansen to explore the Arctic from 1893 to 1896, and by Otto Sverdrup to explore the islands of northern Canada from 1898 to 1902, and by Roald Amundsen to go to Antarctica and in the race towards the pole from 1910 to 1912. When the ship returned to Norway after the South Pole expedition on 17th of July in 1914, she was laying without use to anybody for almost 10 years. Then a group of polar explorers and private individuals decided to raise money to save the ship and prepare her into a museum. The committee to preserve the polar ship Fram was established, and after 5 years they had raised enough money to restore the ship and another 5 years to build this museum. So on 20th of May in 1936, the museum was opened by King Haakon and his son Crown Prince Olav. The polar ship Fram, which you can see in the background, was an idea of Fridtjof Nansen. He contacted Norwegian shipbuilder Colin Archer, and in a frequent dialogue by letters and visits, they made the initial drawings of the ship. And the purpose of the whole construction was to make a ship that could withstand the pressure of the ice. So when the ice pressed from both sides on the vessel of the hull, she would be lifted and float safely on top of the ice, which we'll hear more about later. So through 33 different stations on board the ship, you will become an expert on her vessel and her inhabitants. So join me on board. Welcome. We are now on the deck of the polar ship Fram. As you can see, she is quite large, 39 meters long and 11 meters wide, but it did become quite crowded with up to 19 men and more than 100 dogs. When they laid the keel of the ship back in 1891, they found out that the piece of wood they got from America was actually 2 feet longer than the original drawings. So they decided, let's just make the ship a little bit bigger so they didn't have to cut into the keel. When you imagine that this deck is packed with dogs, equipment and men, working tools, etc., and quite low in the water and going to Antarctica through some of the worst storms that these Norwegian sailors have seen, it became quite a ruckus. And later you will see an example on how this storm worked for the ship. This is the windmill on board, established in 1893 to create electricity for light, working light and reading light during the long winter nights in the Arctic. In the end, the cogwheels and the equipment became so worn out that it was dismantled in March 1895, and the material used to make skis and also sledges. It was quite dangerous when the wind was very hard because it rotated very quickly, and at one time one of the puppies got stuck in the axle going downstairs and rotated very, very quickly and was almost beaten to death. But they managed to bring the dog back to life, and the dog was renamed Axel after the incident. We're now in the aft of the ship, and behind the helm we can see 2 wells, the propeller well and the rudder well. This was created because when the ship was locked into the ice to protect the rudder and the propeller, these could be lifted up and lay on deck. And of course that was perfect when the ship was locked in the ice, but when she was going for full force with the engine, as Amundsen used it, going to Antarctica, the equipment was not perfect. So because of all the frictions of the propeller, the ball bearings got worn out. So every 2 weeks they had to lift the propeller on deck, cast new ball bearings, and then put the propeller back down. And that whole process took 3 days. So for every 2 weeks during the entire 4.5-month voyage to Antarctica, the engine was not in use for 3 of those days. We're now in the galley of the Fram in the middle of the ship. On the first expedition with Nansen, the job as cook rotated between several different people. On the second expedition, Adolf Henrik Lindström, which you can see in front of me, was hired as cook. And after 4 years, he got tired of the job, so when he was recruited for the third expedition, the Amundsen voyage to the South Pole, he wanted to be an engineer. He started up in the engine room, but very quickly people got tired with the cook, Sandvik. He had a bad temper and he could not make bread. They were completely raw on the inside and completely black on the outside. So then Lindström had to move up from the galley and up from the engine room and back into the galley. If you were here, you would have smelled quite strongly American pancakes, as you can see a stack of on the Fram plate with Lindström. And this is because when Roald Amundsen had sailed through the Northwest Passage on the Gjøa, he went 1,500 miles on skis to send a telegram that he was through the Northwest Passage, and crossing the border to Alaska in a guest house, he tasted American pancakes for the first time. And he writes in his diary on the 1st of December 1905, "This is the best food I ever tasted. How can I ever have a normal breakfast again?" He got the recipe, and for the rest of his expedition life, Lindström or the other cook made him American pancakes, which also became very popular with the other men. This is the aft saloon of Fram, and the only common area during the first Fram expedition. Surrounding the saloon, we can see 6 cabins. There were 4 individual cabins for the officers, and there were 2 cabins for the 9 people to share. And in here, everything took place. They dined, they gambled, they played the organ, sang at concerts, some drinking, making skis and sledges, etc. So it became a very important area during the expedition. And now we will go into every single cabin and talk about some of the equipment that's in there. We're now in the cabin of Fridtjof Nansen, which you can see beside me in a model made by Katrin Abrahamsen, a Swedish model maker. And he's 192 tall, while his bed is only about 160. So as you will see in all the other cabins, there were very cramped conditions for the 4 people that also had an individual cabin. And in his cabin there's a lot of equipment from the expedition and things to remind him of home. He brought with him the work of Nordenskjold from the first expedition through the Northeast Passage. One of his favorite items was a photo of his wife Eva and his newborn baby Liv. And also there's another passport photo of his wife. The drawing behind me of his wife and daughter is made by the famous Norwegian artist Erik Wernskjold. We have maps of Franz Josef Land and other things, his woolen jacket, arms, original photo equipment from the expedition, and also a microscope. As Nansen was the main scientist on board, he also spent a lot of time researching the different samples that they pull out of the sea and the ice. We're now in the cabin of Sigurd Scott Hansen. He was lieutenant in the Navy and responsible for navigation and a scientific assistant. In front of me was one of the favorite pastimes on board the Fram expedition, the strategy game Halma. It was developed in Germany and called Stern Halma, and when imported to United States it was renamed Chinese checkers. Of course it had nothing to do with checkers or China. In Norway it's known as Kina sjakk and is popular even to this day. Scott Hansen have his wolfskin fur here, which was good to have when you're doing navigation and scientific sampling in minus 40 degrees and stormy weather. A lot in his cabin is relevant to his fiancée, Anna, and which he wrote a lot about in his diary. And remember that everything in these cabins can be seen on our website in the spectacular virtual tour, where we can go into each individual cabin and see everything that's in it and also what's on the walls. So welcome to do that. We're now in one of the aft cabins that fitted 4 people. In this cabin you had the 2 engineers, the stoker, and also the primary cook was here. So they had to be available 24/7. So they should not wake up all the others. And in here there was also a hatch where you could go directly into the engine room from the cabin. It's covered now so we can't see it. But of course 4 people in this small cabin made it very crowded. Not much peace during the 3-year expedition. And also in the beginning of the expedition it was also very wet and humid because Nansen decided that you should save on coal and not heat up the cabins. So the first 6 months the sleeping bags were frozen to the walls. There was dripping water and humidity from the ceiling and from the bunks above you. So it was quite a horrible condition for most of the men. But during Christmas, the first Christmas on board, they started to heat and living condition became a lot better. But of course, they were all thinking about their wives and family at home during most of the day. This is the second foreman cabin, but in this was actually living 5 crew members, because when Fram passed Tromsø on the way north up in the ice, Nansen saw the need of an extra man, so an additional person was hired. So he had to share a bed with another crew members for a year and a half before Fridtjof Nansen and Hjalmar Johansen left the ship. So even more crowded than in the other cabin. Behind me we have cut an opening in the wall so you can see some of the construction and how tight each rib in the construction is in the aft part of the ship. It's quite amazing to have a look at. There's a lot of Italian oak gathered in one place. We're now in the cabin of Henrik Greve Blessing. He was the medical doctor on board on the first expedition, but also worked as a botanist and a veterinarian. So here we have several of the samples that he worked on and some of the spices and different things they made medicines of. And we also can see his very small letter opener engraved HGB. He was a popular person on board, but after a while he started to use the morphine from the medical chest on himself. In his diary he writes it, he's doing it to test it and how it affects his physical conditions up in the darkness and in the ice. But of course it became a larger problem when he was not able to work for longer period of time. He informed the second-in-command Sverdrup after a while, but some of the other men with experiences from different institutions recognized some of the traces, and in the end a lot of the crew members tried to help him. But he used up all the morphine on board and also some of the other drugs before the expedition was finished. He also worked as a part-time photographer, as several of the photos known from the expedition after Nansen have left the ship is taken by Blessing. This is the cabin of Otto Sverdrup. He was the captain of the ship and also second in command of the expedition. When Nansen and Johansen left the ship to go to the North Pole, he became expedition leader and was in charge for the remaining a year and a half. In his cabin we have one of the music boxes on the ship, which you can hear in the background. And also we have his pictures of his wife and daughter. Sverdrup, after the expedition, 2 years after, he mounted his own expedition, the second Fram expedition, and as expedition leader, and got with him only one crew member that was part of the first expedition. We're now in the hallway between the aft saloon and the galley. Behind me you can see the high thresholds, 40 centimeters high, were made to prevent the cold to sneak into the saloon and also the individual cabins. Here is the entry to one of the coal bunkers, which supplied the steam engine, and here is the entrance to the engine room where we're now heading. This is the engine room of the Fram, and in front of me is the diesel engine that Amundsen put in front of or before the South Pole expedition. For the first two expeditions there had been a steam engine. Amundsen was more modern, he wanted something more efficient, and installed this diesel engine made in Sweden at AB Diesel. And this is said to be the first diesel engine ever installed in an ocean-going vessel. It has 180 horsepower, it's a two-stroke engine, 4 cylinders, and the first 2 cylinders here are for air pressure, build up air pressure to start the engine. The gentleman beside me is the third engineer on the South Pole expedition, Halvardus Christensen. While all the others wrote diaries and told about ice barriers and penguins and the South Pole expedition, he only wrote love letters to his fiancée. There's no word about penguins, no word about meeting the ice barrier, nothing about the South Pole in itself, just I love you, and butterflies and bees. So it's quite an interesting view of one of the most important polar expeditions of its time, to read the letters of Halvardus Christensen. We have now left Fram as she was during Nansen's expedition to the north and entered Fram as how she was during Amundsen's expedition to the south. We are now in the hold, where Amundsen had more than 1,200 boxes with equipment and tools he needed to win the race to the South Pole. There's bear, sealskin furs, outfits, and also we have displayed Amundsen's personal drawing on how, or a map on how everything was stored and which number was stored where in here. We also have pictures of the expedition and a small cinema in here where you can hear about the voyage to Antarctica. The hold is an amazing place to be, and here you can really see how strong Fram is, and especially all the wooden knees which are everywhere down in the hold. Not being able to use iron knees which could break with the constant movement of the ice, they digged out 400 trees from the forest outside of Oslo and hand-shaped with axe 400 knees made of a tree, stem and root. So everywhere you can see it, and especially in the front, you see how these timber are individually shaped to fit every rib in this ship. And all the way in the bow you can see that there's 1 meter and 25 centimeters of pure oak. And at the sides we have 3 layers of wood at 80 centimeters wide all around the ship. I'm now in front of the electrical panel below deck of the Fram, and this was in direct contact with the windmill on the main deck. This panel controlled how to use the electricity if the windmill was just charging the batteries, just lighting up the lights, or any combination behind of these, any of these combinations. In total, the electrical equipment gave 20,399 light hours during expedition, divided by 14 different lamps in cabins, work areas, on deck, etc. In the hold, we can see some of the equipment and provisions that was used on the expedition. And one of the most popular things, of course, was chocolate. Amundsen preferred Swiss chocolate for rest and dinner in camp, but during the skiing and on expeditions, he preferred the Swedish Cloetta. And as a special treat, we have an original chocolate bar that was with Amundsen at the South Pole and is carved in the South Pole and the date where Amundsen arrived at the South Pole. And this can be seen in this box here. We're now in the sailmaker's workshop. Here Martin Rønne worked with his Singer sewing machine. They made everything that Amundsen needed for his attempt to get first to the South Pole. Anoraks, adjusted tents, sleeping bags, all type of equipment, even repairing sail, that was needed. The Singer sewing machine was portable, so in good weather he used it on deck, and it followed him on many other expeditions, like Amundsen's Maud expeditions, but also the first expedition of Richard Byrd to Antarctica. We're now in the main saloon of the Fram, and this became part of the ship when the Fram was rebuilt before the second and third expedition, when another deck was added to the ship. Here we can see how she was dressed for Christmas Eve, 24th of December 1910. In the background, the Danish soprano Harold was playing Silent Night. In front of us we have the enamelware, which Amundsen made especially for the expedition with the Fram on it. And the replica of these plates and cups can be bought in our shop and has become one of our most popular products. And around this saloon we have 6 individual cabins, also Amundsen packing crates, the piano, skis and ski poles were stored, etc. But this was kind of the nave, the hub of the expedition, where most of the social time took place. So now we're in Thorvald Nilsen's cabin. He was second in command of Amundsen's expedition. And as you can see, there's a bit higher standard 20 years later than Nansen's expeditions. So most crew members had individual cabins. In his cabin we have the saber of Nilsen. He was a naval officer. All the men had specially made sealskin furs. We can also see the maps that was on the expedition where the route of Fram is drawn in. And here you can see Nilsen's hand-drawn maps of the Bay of Whales and the Ross Sea and the route of the Fram into the Framheim and the Bay of Whales area. I am now in Roald Amundsen's cabin from the South Pole expedition, and I'm surrounded by artifacts, books and photos which were important to him. We have books from Shackleton's Antarctic expedition, the Antarctic expedition of Otto Nordenskjold and Borchgrevink are here. We actually have a tobacco jar that was on Scott's Terra Nova expedition, which is put into his cabin. His important gramophone, which was used for all moving and special events during the expedition, and it had an important role to play during Christmas Eve in 1910. In the back is photos from Amundsen's expedition through the Northwest Passage, and I think of his expedition life, the life with the Inuit in Johaven in Arctic Canada, was the period that meant most to him, and there's some pictures from that. There's also a medal celebrating Norwegian independence from 7th of June 1905. Norway's national day is May 17, our Constitution Day, but during 1905 Amundsen felt that Independence Day is much more important. That's the day that you should celebrate. But of course he continued to celebrate 17th of May because that was the date of the cook Lindström's birthday. We also have pictures here of his best friend, his brother Leon, and his wife, and the house he was born and brought up in southern part of Norway. There are maps from the expedition and also maps of earlier exploration of Antarctica. Alexander Kutschin was from Russia, Arkhangelsk area, and he was hired as an oceanographer on board. He knew fluent Norwegian, as he had a Norwegian fiancée, and part of the expedition, while Amundsen and his men went to the South Pole and back, Fram left the Bay of Whales, went to Buenos Aires, and did the first oceanographic cruise that was ever done between South America and Africa. And here you can see their route. So when this cruise was done and all the stations taken and water samples done, Kutschin left Fram and brought all the water samples back to Norway for, amongst others, Fridtjof Nansen to study and publish a book about. Kutschin, when he left the expedition, he was hired as captain on Rusanov's expedition to the north, the Russian explorer. And in the ship Hercules, they disappeared in 1913 trying to sail the Northeast Passage, and nothing has seen from Rusanov, Hercules, or any other on board since. So he most likely died in 1913 or 1914. So where did I go to the toilet? That's a question we get from most kids here at the Fram Museum. And there were 2 toilets on deck, but there was also a small one inside. And here you can see that the water was filled on this tank directly from the deck, and then you have the handle inside where you could flush. During storm and hurricanes, this was probably the safer place to go when you needed it. This is the cabin of Hjalmar Fredrik Gjertsen. He was second mate on the expedition to the South Pole and also a lieutenant in the Navy. In fact, he was the best in his class at Academy, and during the crowning of the Norwegian King and Queen, he was among them that held the Queen's veil during the coronation. He was so eager to take part in the skiing towards the South Pole that he begged for months Amundsen to be part of the crew. But Amundsen needed navigators on Fram, so he became part of the ship party and took part in the oceanographic research in the Atlantic Ocean. After the expedition, he took part in several expeditions with Byrd, and also became an active and important resistance member during the Second World War. I think he was one of the oldest officers to be captured by the German after he stole a whole trainload of petroleum to avoid the Germans to get in hold of it during the occupation. Sverre Hassel was a key member of Amundsen's expedition. He had already been 4 years on the Fram with Sverdrup and had substantial experience in dog sledding. in the Arctic. So he was specially headhunted by Amundsen to be part of his team that were going to win the race to the South Pole. So he knew dogs and he had experience as a sailor. So at first he only wanted to join as part of a sailor for part of the expedition, but eventually was persuaded to take part in all of it. He became one of Amundsen's best friends and died in his garden of heart attack just before Amundsen himself died a few days later, attempting to rescue the Italian Umberto Nobile in 1928. This is the cabin of Christian Prestrud, who was first mate on Amundsen's expedition. He was a ladies' man, very elegant, did the speeches, write all the funny songs, which are quoted in many diaries, quite the entertainer. He was also part of the shore party of Amundsen, but did not succeed very well on skiing and in the colds. He was not part of the 5 men that reached the South Pole on 14th of December in 1911. But he was a lieutenant in the Navy and had a substantial naval career and was part of the assistant to the Norwegian king. He was also naval attaché in London and Paris. So quite an important character in Norwegian Navy and in Norwegian polar exploration. Behind me you can see a French dartboard from 1910, an extremely popular pastime among the members of Amundsen's party during the wintering in Antarctic. Every day in the evening they played for prizes, and the winner of the entire competition was Jørgen Stubberud, the carpenter, who won a gold watch from Roald Amundsen. Roald Amundsen loved to play the piano, but according to his crew member, he only played one song. That was In the Shade of the Old Apple Tree, and a hit in the United States in 1905. And while reporters asked Amundsen's crew member, he must have played other songs, but they say no, he played In the Shade of the Old Apple Tree all the time. Over the piano you can see the Norwegian royal family in 1910, Queen Maud and King Haakon and young Prince Olav. Royal family was very important for Amundsen. On all his expeditions he had photos of them and became good friends with both the king and the queen. This is the workshop where a lot of the equipment on the expeditions were made during the sailing from Norway to Antarctica. One of the important parts are the sledging boxes, which were made by the carpenters in ash. They had this special feature that you could strap them permanently to the sledges, so you didn't have to pack and unpack in the frozen ice every morning and every night. But on top they had this little lid where you can take out what you needed, and you had little notebooks that said what was in each box. And each of the boxes were numbered, and here you have burned in number 15 in this box. Behind us we have one of those leather sewing machines, which was useful when you made dog harnesses and adapted shoes, etc. It's an important place during the entire expedition.